Francisca Linconao, one of the 11 Mapuche activists being investigated for homicide, has fled to Bolivia, seeking asylum from President Evo Morales. Despite her impending February court date, the Mapuche spiritual leader took advantage of her last month of freedom to petition for international intervention, denouncing the case as unjust. Linconao and 10 Mapuche activists are under investigation for the double homicide of Werner Lutzinger and Vivian Mackay in 2013. And people in Chile are remembering Mateus Catrillo, a young Mapuche killed 10 years ago during a peaceful demonstration. Our correspondent Francisca Castillo has more details.
Today we are expecting a new demonstration in the capital to honor and remember Mateus Catrillo, a young Mapuche killed 10 years ago and who became a symbol of the fight for the indigenous communities. Let's remember that Mateus Catrillo died while peacefully protesting to defend their land along with other members of the community. The Chilean police shot him 3 times. Today, several communities are remembering his fight around the country. In the region of Temuco, in the south of Chile, several events have been prepared, and today in the afternoon we are expecting a demonstration in Santiago. All of these are happening in the midst of a complicated process, since the Mapuche people are close to facing yet another trial at the end of February involving a murder of a couple, a high-profile case known as Lutzinger Mackay. The prosecution opened a new case after the 11 Mapuche that were accused of the crime were absolved. In February as well, Pope Francis will be visiting some Mapuche communities in the Araucanía region, and several demonstrations are expected then as well.
Ecuador's social and political organizations are campaigning for both yes and no sides of the referendum, while members of Alianza País are reporting irregularities and disadvantages for some of those enrolled.
The National Electoral Council registered 36 social and political organizations to campaign for the yes option, and 4 organizations for the no. The electoral institution already has a budget to be used in promotion and expenses for both sides. The referendum will take place the 4th of February.
This electoral campaign budget has $279,141 assigned for each question. We have established that both yes and no campaign will get the same amount, $1,953,989.
Other social organizations will support and promote the government's plan in spite of not being registered by the National Electoral Council to campaign.
With my partners from the parish board and with the leaders of different organizations, we will fight to guarantee that yes wins and to ensure the process of continuity and the consolidation of democracy.
On the other side, leaders and assembly members from Alianza País denounced the disadvantages their campaign faces, saying some of their registered supporters are in fact opponents.
The system is against us. We have people in our groups who have been approved to be part of the no group, but are supporting the yes. There was no reason for organizations that campaign for no to approve organizations that are publicly against it. But they were approved. This is just a way to reduce the resources for the no campaign.
For this and many other reasons, they say they will mount a mass campaign for the no in the referendum, beginning with a rally in Puerto Viejo this Saturday, with Rafael Correa, the leader of the Citizen Revolution, as the main speaker.
2 weeks after he was released from prison and pardoned on medical grounds, Peru's former leader, Alberto Fujimori, has been found well enough to go home. Fujimori waved to the crowds as he was wheeled to freedom from the hospital in Lima. There were cries of both welcome and distress as Fujimori set off for his family home alongside his son Kenji. It has been alleged that Kenji helped to block an impeachment vote against the current president, Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, in exchange for his father's pardon. The dictator's pardon continues to inspire anger, protest, and condemnation on the streets of Lima.
Fujimori has sold out the country, and now he wants to leave because he has everything he stole, stored in Japan, gold bars and everything. That's why he left. Now he will go there, pick up what he stole. He has killed people. He has done great damage. He kidnapped people to murder them.
He doesn't look very sick. Of course, he's a 79-year-old man with hypertension, and he has the afflictions that go with his age. But he doesn't appear to be very sick, much less with a terminal illness. The pardon has been political. It is not about his health. But they need to conceal it because if they don't, people will be even more irritated. This talk about national reconciliation is a story, a narrative. They are trying to sell for the public opinion, but they will have a hard time because the circumstances in which the pardon was given are very ugly, so to speak. It was a bold-faced negotiation, a pardon in exchange for saving the president from being removed from office.
The Organization of American States has asked its 34 state members to approve the report from the election observers on the president election in Honduras. The OAS Secretary General, Luis Almagro, said that approval is urgent to clearly determine the irregularities in the process. Voters are still accusing the government of electoral fraud and have continued to protest against the re-election of Juan Orlando Hernandez. The Honduran government has rejected the OAS's call to hold new presidential elections after the opposition alliance candidate Salvador Nasrallah denounced electoral fraud. For many, Juan Orlando Hernandez is starting his second consecutive term with low credibility and the opposition of the international community. Social movements in Honduras are denouncing what they call an alarming increase in suppression. Our correspondent in Tegucigalpa, Gilda Silva-Strucci, reports.
Honduran military police were caught on camera in a neighborhood of Tegucigalpa searching for people who took part in recent protests.
The army showed up yesterday, very aggressively. They patted me down and threatened me by saying we would face the consequences if we had been involved in the protests.
Protesters say the military are harassing them and have the names and pictures of protesters who have regularly shown up to rallies.
We've been surprised to see they have a list with pictures of most of us. Of those of us who take part in peaceful rallies, it's hard to believe they're going door to door, showing our pictures and looking for us.
The army's presence increases at night, particularly in neighborhoods where there are regular protests. During the demonstrations that followed November's elections, it was commonplace to see the police and the military taking pictures and video protesters. This is something that alarms human rights organizations.
Another dangerous pattern we are seeing is the return of death squads. We are now dealing with death squads that are even more lethal and cruel than back in the 80s, because at least back then they would cover their faces.
Another worrying aspect is the widespread silence of the national media, who have yet not given any prominence to murders or human rights violations.
31
people have been killed, mostly young people from the lower class. This causes no commotion in this country, but if they had been journalists or someone from the upper class, things would have been very different. Sooner or later, Honduras will be condemned for these deaths.
Most of the deaths and human rights violations have happened in the northern region of the country, where the protests have been most intense.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. In March, the term of the President of Trinidad and Tobago, Anthony Carmona, will come to an end. His appointment will not be renewed, and after meeting with the opposition on Friday morning, the government has announced that they have selected a woman as their nominee for the President of the Republic.
This government's nominee for election to the President of Trinidad and Tobago is Madam Justice Paula May Weeks. Madam Justice Paula May Weeks, as I'm sure the population would be aware, has had a sterling, stellar career as a jurist in Trinidad and Tobago, rising to the highest level, which is the Court of Appeal in Trinidad and Tobago, where she served for approximately 11 years as a Court of Appeal judge. She started her schooling at Bishop's Anstey. I've been told that that must be made aware to the public of Trinidad and Tobago by the proud alumni of Bishop's Anstey, and then she went on to the University of West Indies.
Trinidad and Tobago Carnival was launched today at the Queen's Park Savannah. The chairman of the National Carnival Commission, Colin Lucas, says their goal is to make this a guaranteed addition to the calendars of tourists the world over. He said the commission had decided to reintroduce the Carnival Kings and Queens to the annual Calypso competition, a controversial decision that could lead to the show being unmanageably long. Trinidad and Tobago Carnival takes place on the 12th and 13th of February. And Dominica is using its annual carnival to aid in its post-Maria recovery. At the launch of Carnival 2018, organizers spoke of the benefit the festival will bring to the island economically and psychologically. CEO of Discover Dominica Authority, Colin Piper, says their focus is on promoting the island's nature, culture and adventure.
These three events are in fact the cornerstone of our festival's tourism program. Like the nation on a whole and many other sectors, the tourism sector continues to rebuild post-Hurricane Maria. I'm pleased that the cultural industries can play their part in both allowing us to honor and celebrate our tradition while stimulating the economy and allowing those who do earn a living in the entertainment and cultural spheres the opportunity to do so.
This weekend, the Venezuelan government will begin a mass consultation to gather people's ideas for the new government plan for 2019 to 2025. Our correspondent, Freddie Gillingham, has more.
So as part of President Nicolas Maduro's final televised announcement of 2017 that he made on Sunday, he declared that the plan of the Homeland Initiative will be elaborated on. He called for the nation to come together and he summoned the local social forces to meet this weekend to begin constructing a new plan for 2019 to 2025. Just to give you a bit of background information of what this plan is, it was set up in 2012 by the late President Hugo Chavez to serve as a kind of guide of governance on the various issues which affect the nation, most notably climate change, environmental protection and the energy sectors. In that televised announcement made last Sunday, Maduro reiterated the importance for the people to come together to decide on these massive matters and declared that it wasn't something that lawyers and consultants can create on their own. We will update you early next week on the findings of the weekend. That's all from me in Caracas. Back to you in the studio.
A poll by the Center for Studies of Public Opinion shows that 70% of Argentinians feel pessimistic about the economic situation. Done as an exclusive for the Página 12 newspaper, it warns that the government is starting 2018 with a worrying decrease in people's expectations. More from our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Carolina Silvestre.
Economist Ernesto Matos knows that the worsening state of President Macri's administration is due to adjustment policies that have been applied to most vulnerable sectors.
Workers, unions, small and medium industries are the ones who are losing. We have a commercial deficit of $7.6 billion, which stems mostly from imports, and 40% of this deficit comes from importing energy sources.
Matos warns that prospects are continuing to fall because people are noticing who this economy model benefits the most and who it doesn't.
The winners here are big transnational industries, who are profiting from closing down factories and by controlling the network of providers and commercialization. This allows them to set prices.
With rising prices for transport, electricity, gas, tolls, phone lines and food, along with an increase in price for the dollar, the proposed budget for the year is already outdated. The Chief of Ministers admitted this a few days ago after announcing annual inflation will rise by 18%.
The current economic scenario will cause further protests, and for different reasons, every day. The level of social anger is difficult to contain, and we don't see why it must be contained, since this government was elected by a large part of the population, and the damage is affecting them in a big way.
Unhappiness deepens when, during a time of mass layoffs and rising concern, the Labour Minister of the ruling party announces that unions are to decrease by 15%.
We are betting on government allowing us to get work, but Macri is headstrong against this idea. He is his worst enemy. He continues to create unfavorable scenarios for workers, for retirees, for the population in general. So our last resort is resistance.
For Daniel Catalano, a union leader representing state workers, 2018 we see an increase of conflicts as the government neoliberal model deepens.
International labor unions have announced actions in support of former Brazilian President Luiz Ignacio Lula da Silva and a legal process for his candidacy in the presidential elections in October. Our correspondent Adriana Robreño has more details in the next report.
Hola, saludos para ti, para toda la audiencia.
International labor unions are planning to join the initiative of thousands of Brazilians who will march together to support former President Lula da Silva on February 24th in Porto Alegre. On this date, a regional federal court will evaluate a request by Lula's defense attorney to override a 9-year sentence imposed by Judge Sergio Moro in July 2017. The president of the International Trade Union Confederation, João Felicio, along with the Secretary of Industry All Global Union, Walter Sanchez, informed they will mobilize their institutions to participate in the activities in support of Lula. They also said there will be buses coming from Argentina and Uruguay, where there is a strong labor movement to support the former president. Starting on January 13th, there will be a mobilization across the country to back Lula's presidential candidacy. The Workers' Party said that Lula's caravan tours will continue in February. After the carnival, Lula will visit 3 southern states, Paraná, Santa Catarina, and Rio Grande do Sul. According to the polls, Lula is the favored candidate to win the presidential elections in October, even with the legal and political persecution against him.
Presidential candidates in Mexico are defining their stand on international security 7 months away from elections. Our correspondent Pablo Perez has more.
Presidential candidates are focusing their campaigns on security issues after 2017 was registered as the most violent year for Mexico. According to official reports, the governing party candidate José Antonio Meade talked about the controversial interior security law that was recently approved.
The internal security law opens dialogue between civilians and the armed forces, allowing the role to be clearly defined and regulated. This, along with other measures, will help us recover our peace.
Many say that this reform is an attempt to militarize the country. Despite this, the pre-candidate defended the law.
We don't understand those who question the support of the armed forces, because by doing so, they are depriving civilians of safety, and that's what they want.
But the left-wing candidate has a different stand on the security reform.
We cannot fight violence with violence. We cannot fight evil with evil. Peace and safety are the consequence of justice. We will take care of all social issues.
López Obrador said that it's urgent to work on safety issues and create a National Citizen Security Council.
The safety and security issues that we are facing today are the consequence of us forgetting about the rural area.
In a country where there are 46 homicides a day, 7 of them are femicides, and 51 million Mexicans can't afford basic goods, presidential candidates are showing their different takes on how to face these issues.
At least 312 human rights defenders were killed in 2017 in 27 different countries, according to a new report published by the organization Social Line Defenders. 80% of these killings happened in 4 countries: Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, and the Philippines. 2/3 of those killed were activists defending land, the environment, and indigenous peoples' rights. The report also outlined that in 84% of the cases, the defenders had already been threatened. Just in Colombia, more than 90 activists were murdered, as well as 30 in Brazil and 32 people in Mexico. Only 12% of all murder cases resulted in an arrest. The Colombian government ceasefire with the other guerrilla organization, the National Liberation Army, expires next Tuesday. Several civil society sectors have asked the ELN and the government to extend the ceasefire. More details in the next report.
University professor Víctor de Curria Lugo is one of the hundreds of Colombians that signed a letter addressed to President Juan Manuel Santos and the ELN leader Nicolás Rodríguez Bautista. The letter asked the leaders to maintain the ceasefire during the peace dialogue.
Negotiating in the middle of the war is dangerous, but it's even more dangerous to discard a ceasefire that required so much effort, which is the first in 26 years of talks between the government and the ELN, and it has shown real efficiency to the communities. Today we are receiving messages from people of Arauca, Catatumbo, Cauca, campesinos, African American and indigenous people who want an extension of the ceasefire.
During the bilateral ceasefire between the ELN and the Colombian state, there have been difficulties. However, the benefits of this are measured in the lives that have been saved. The peacemaker Carlos Belanda points out that in 3 months of ceasefire, 90 Colombian lives were saved, and 400 others were saved from being harmed. So that is why he also signed a letter from the civil society.
The death of a policeman, the death of a soldier, or the death of a guerrilla doesn't make too much of a difference in the balance of 53 years of war, but it does bring pain to the families and the communities of these people, so we should avoid unnecessary pain.
These requests also come from the regions. In the last hours, the Compass communities warned that 12 families were forcibly displaced from the Guijo-Amando and Curvarado territories in Chocó due to combats between ELN and Gaitanes autodefense paramilitaries. People declare that it is urgent to extend the ceasefire and to dissemble paramilitarianism. Uncertainty still remains in the Colombian people. They expect that the ELN and the national government will be able to overcome the difficulties to maintain the peace.
People continue to protest in the Urabá region of Colombia against a road toll that controls transport between two municipalities. The demonstrators blocked some roads in the Caripa municipality with burning tires while police forces tried to disperse the protesters. At least one person has been killed and many more injured since Wednesday. And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Welcome back. Israel has released Ahed Tamimi's cousin on bail after she was charged with assaulting an Israeli soldier in the occupied West Bank following the viral video of the incident. Ahed Tamimi remains in custody along with her mother Nariman. 21-year-old Noor Tamimi, who studies journalism at Al-Quds University, will have to sign in at an Israeli police station every Friday at noon before court proceedings against her begin on February 12.
The inquiry was difficult. He, the detective, bullied me. He would slam his fist on the table and threaten me by saying he'd bring in my father and my brother. He told me, "Speak, or I'll blow up your house." He used verbal violence.
French President Emmanuel Macron has said that no progress is possible in Turkey's bid to join the European Union, citing human rights concerns. The comments followed a visit by the Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan to Paris.
With regard to the relationship with the European Union, it is clear that recent developments and choices allow no progress in the process that is underway. And we have had a very frank discussion on the matter. But I think that the cooperation, the work required for a dialogue that needs to be rethought, reformulated in a more contemporary context and taking into account the realities of today's world, must be proposed in the coming months.
A number of people were arrested in Paris while protesting Erdogan's visit. The protesters, mainly of Kurdish origin, were trying to reach the Élysée Palace, where the meeting between the two leaders were taking place. Several hundred people have taken to the streets in Turkey to protest the ousting of a mayor in Istanbul. The Interior Ministry dismissed the high-profile mayor, an elected member of the opposition CHP party, sparking accusations that this was yet another politically motivated dismissal in a long line of names.
As a person who believes in democracy, I think that whoever is in office due to an election should leave his post only because of another election. This is totally unacceptable. There is a judicial process. He should be judged and be removed only if he is sentenced.
And with that, let's take a look at some of the other news from around the world.
37 people have died in flooding when torrential rain and mudslides swept through shanty homes in Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo and home to 10 million people. Although it's forbidden to build their homes on these slopes, they don't have the money to go anywhere else.
It was 2 in the morning. We heard people shouting, "Oh help! Oh help!" When we went out, we saw water overflowing on the other side there. There was a house that collapsed in the rain. In the moment we went there, we noticed that there were dead people.
Demonstrators have gathered in Barcelona to call for the release of jailed pro-Catalan independence leader Oriol Junqueras after he appeared in court the day before, requesting that he be able to leave detention and take his seat in the newly appointed Catalan government. The separatist was arrested on November 2nd, along with 8 other former Catalan government members, on charges of rebellion, sedition and embezzlement.
Oriol's and the other politicians' imprisonment is a unequivocal verification of the poor democratic quality of the Spanish state, as the European Council has reminded this past week. A state that does not accept the difference and uses justice as derision for all those who don't want to abjure their ideas, and threatens everyone who stays true to their ideas and ideals.
An emergency meeting on Iran at the UN Security Council saw the United States warn Iran that it would be watching its actions following anti-government protests this week.
If the founding principles of this institution mean anything, we will not only hear their cry, we will finally answer it. The Iranian regime is now on notice. The world will be watching what you do.
Hundreds of pro-government supporters marched through the streets of Tehran, where protesters burned a banner depicting the US flag and denounced US President Donald Trump's alleged support of the recent anti-government protests that claimed the lives of 21 people. They also decry the US's interference in the region.
I say that Trump showed his true colors, and all of us are aware of America's problems. I want to tell Trump that if you have the capacity, then go and solve your own problems. Consider your problems and your country. Why are you everywhere? Why is the whole world suffering from you? If you have the capability, then go and solve your country's problems.
South and North Korea will hold high-level talks on Tuesday to discuss Pyongyang's possible involvement in the 2018 South Korean Winter Olympics, as well as further ways to improve ties, according to the South Korean Unification Ministry spokesperson speaking on Friday from Seoul.
We've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Sonia Gray. Have a good weekend.